So we have three talks today. How to write the abstract and acknowledgments, and then another one in the process of submitting the manuscript, which are the steps and what happens when we submit in the reviews. And lastly, later on, we're going to give a talk on the ethics in science and yeah, different aspects that we find ethically in our writing, and conflicts of interest and these kind of examples that we have. So we're going to start with the writing the abstract and the acknowledgement. Like Gregory was saying yesterday, those that listen, writing an effective abstract is very important. So we're going to talk about the functions of the abstract and parts of the abstract, and then about the acknowledgements, how and where you should write them. Um, so it does in advance. Okay. Functions of the abstract um, is a complete story of your work, but in 250, 300 words. Again, it depends on the journal. Some are up to 500 words, but usually it's about 300 words. So you have to summarize your whole work in 300 words. And what does it contain? A brief orientation of the topic, your specific goal or specific question that you set to answer, strategic methods used, not all the methods, but the important, what strategy and methods you use, central results, and a big conclusion. One, usually two conclusions because there is no room. So it's basically the whole article, very, very summarized. And summarizes the major points of the abstract. The abstract is used as an indexing tool and is available in electronic databases and might be the only part that of your paper that people read. So this is what actually was a question yesterday. If we can read only the abstract, how do we get the total article? And we suggested to write to the author, because obtaining the full article, you had to pay. Anyway, this is a parenthesis. So the abstract attracts the reader to read the rest of the article, and you want them to read the full article. So make the abstract clear, compelling, with all the exciting findings that you have, so that you can have an impact, because this is an indexing tool, and it will be indexed and it will be found by your colleagues and everybody more than the total article that you wrote. So it's not an introduction, it's not a list, it's not a mystery to be solved. What does this mean? You have to present in your title and in the abstract your main results, your most exciting results, what's new, what's innovative. And it's not a list of the things to do, and it's not an introduction. Many times abstracts, when we write them for a proposal, it has a lot of introductions and stating of the problem, and that's not what we're asking here. We want the answer to this mystery. We want the data. So it's like making a mini abstract. It has all the parts of the article that I presented the first day, but summarized. So it will have introduction. It will have only the methods mentioned, more relevant, especially if it's a different method, a novel method, a method that's specific to your article, to your work. It will have the main results only, and the main conclusion and discussion, like just one or two sentences about how what is the significance or the finding. So we write the abstract at the end. Why do you think we write it at the end? Because we already written the article the way we want it. We many times rewrite, reaccommodate, keep ideas, take part of the results. We've been doing this week that. We've been refining our thoughts. We've been adding and taking results. Many of us have rethought what the focus of the article will be. So at the very end, when we actually wrote the discussion and what is the significance of all this, and we wrote the introduction and we wrote the methods and results, we go to the abstract, and write it as compelling as we can. And since we have already a lot of practice writing, the abstract should be easier at the end. So the abstract might contain the same information as the first paragraph of the introduction and the last paragraph of the introduction and the first paragraph of your discussion. Since the abstract was separate from your entire article, you can use very similar wording. In the first paragraph, you use in the introduction to introduce the topic. You can use that in the abstract. The last paragraph on the introduction, where you stated what is the goal of the work you did, um, and the results, the main results. And then the first paragraph of the discussion, when you start saying our findings were those, and this is important because we think this reserve recommendations. Just very summarized. Never include information that is not present elsewhere in the article. We have to limit our discussion to the results we presented. We compared it with other articles, but we don't talk about things that we did not present, that are not related to what we presented um, in the results. So that's why also we have to write it at the end to include the results that we kept, and do not include references, citations in the abstract. That is going to be up to the reader to go back and get the full article, but you do not include references in the abstract. So the first sentence can be general, like I was saying. An example, in recent years, yellow fever has spread throughout the tropical regions of Africa. So that's a very general sentence at the top of the inverted pyramid. And then state the topic or purpose. In this study, the prevalence of death caused by TB were determined in HIV patients with or without our treatment. So this is what we set to do in the study. So that we're getting down into the on the introduction, and then in order to characterize these mutations, we study 83 strains of tuberculosis in South Africa were analyzed by restriction fragment polymorphism, and that will be at the end. That's what we analyze, and then what is the result. What was the main finding of all these 83 strains? We were talking about abbreviations. You see here that the abbreviation was explained. We try to have to avoid abbreviations, something like HIV, TB. Our treatment that's well known don't have to be spelled out, but maybe this RFLP is better to say. So if you have room in your abstract, it's better to put the word that explain it rather than only the abbreviations. And you don't have to do both. In this case, you can eliminate this if you need more space. So the specificity of the methods, and be very brief. Everything is brief in the methods and the abstract. Too general. Biochemical studies show that. Better. In vitro translation studies reveal that. Epidemiological studies show that, and you give your result. But just mention the methodology you use to, analysis of questionnaires given to how many participants show that, and then you give your result. Very almost in the same sentence as you explain the results, you say the methodology that you use for that. And specify your methods briefly. The same that we said before, can often describe methods in the introductory phrase. Using RT-PCR, times how many samples were analyzed for the presence of poliovirus. So you are stating the problem, and you can introduce the methodology very briefly. Using restriction fragments analysis, we characterize the genetic of tuberculosis strain. So this is just kind of redundant examples for you to have in case give you orientation. Then you summarize the results and conclusions. Summarize the central results, the most significant points only, and remove needless information. So the article is a lot longer. We talk about many different results we obtain, but it is the one most significant finding. We keep repeating ourselves. But since the abstract is summary of the whole article, you use the same style. Um, and you only talk about, there is only room to talk about your main finding. What is it that you saw change in your study? Is it a trend in increasing? Is it a decreasing? Is it a need? A lack of information? You have very many different topics. And you only talk about the main points. And then identify the major conclusion. You have a space for your mere conclusions, but you could put a little bit of your own here and discuss that this finding, it has great significance because, or this finding shows this trend of higher resistance, and control measures are necessary, and you can do your major conclusion and recommendation if you have room. So when stating the results, be definite. This is the same style we talk for the whole article. Total number of measles cases decreased in Uganda after the introduction of the WHO campaign in 2012. So they decreased, something increased, something was revealed. The death rate in patients with TB, HIV is still high despite the current treatment. So this is your finding, and is still high. So we have developed a rapid and sensitive one-step PCR assay for detecting dengue virus in serum. So we developed, something decreased, something went up. We are definite. We're clear on what we showed. But when interpreting the results, when you go to the discussion, you don't say, definitely this shows that there is an increase, and we suggest. So no, this indicates that there is a trend of the increase of resistance. This indicates that there is this need for people with caretakers with patients with autism. This suggests the need of implementing, that you suggest that the problem is bigger than expected. This could be interpreted this way, and we think it needs further studying. So you are very definite when you state your results, and you have qualifiers when you the discussion, and that's true for the whole article, and we've talked about this before. So make every word count. Often the abstract is 250 words to 500, depending on the journal. So again, please try to find the journals that you would like to use, even if it's not definite. You can have 2 or 3 journals that you would like to submit your article. Try to find them now. Try to find the most popular, the ones that you dream of publishing, and just study how many words, how they presented. Some abstracts have subtitles, how long it should be, and in general, how's the article written, what kind of figures and tables they present. It really helps. And it'll tell you how long the abstract should be, so then you will know. Look at every word. Do you need every word you put? Save words by eliminating the passive voice. Like we said, we eliminated, we determined, we found, and not it was found by our team, So go direct and read it out loud, because sometimes we repeat ourselves. Sometimes we find out that many words are not necessary, or it's not clear. And trying to summarize so much, we just lost the logic flow of of the abstract or the story we're telling. So read it aloud, read it to somebody else to see if it makes sense. If you're really summarizing what is the most important in your article. And well, that's all I have to say in the abstract. Very important. Again, title and abstract. Write it carefully. Have it reviewed. Have reviewed the English language. Have reviewed the structure. Make sure you have, give it to your team, to other people. Make sure you have all the points you want to include that are important and that you're not over the word count. Okay, so enough about abstract. We're going to talk about acknowledgments, who you should acknowledge. Um, and when in doubt, a general rule is it's better to include more people than to omit someone. So there's no limit. I mean, you cannot have pages and pages of acknowledgments, thanking everybody, the drivers, everybody in the laboratory. But you could include all the people that really help. And it's better to acknowledge here than to omit one, because it's not a limitation to like only 3 people or 5. You can have 10 or different. So acknowledgement. So include anyone who gave you technical help that it didn't do enough to be on the as an author, but help you. Anyone who gave you a valuable input on your study design or interpretations of your results that help you at the beginning or the end to design it and how to interpret it better. Your human subjects, if you study people in this village, people in this hospital, a set of patients, you can see in general, we thank the personnel at this hospital for their cooperation. Anyone to give you materials or supplies. It was the old-fashioned rule was that if anybody shared materials with you, data, samples, that you would put them as an author in the article. And that's not accepted these days. This person just passed on some materials and it didn't have importance in the study, design, or interpretation of the data, just gave you samples, you thank them. Specify your finding sources. At the end of the acknowledgement, you put the grant agency and grant number, fellowship funding, and institutional funding. Somebody had asked at the beginning, where do you thank the funding agency? And it's kind of expected, and I think you must, you really try to have the granting agencies, the number of grant included here or the funding, because this is good for the agency that you actually publish the results that they funded, that the work that you funded is being published, and this counts highly to them. So they sometimes request that you include them in after the acknowledgement. So based on this, you do not acknowledge co-authors, which is a mistake we do. So if somebody gave us samples and started discussed with us our article, and then he gets more involved and we put it as a co-author, then you don't thank him at the end, because then it turns out it contributed more for the article, and also you had probably initially acknowledged this person for give you the samples, and then if he comes a co-author, you don't acknowledge it anymore. So do not duplicate. Those that are co-authors are not acknowledged, and vice versa. So examples, we thank Professor Josephine from Makerere University for technical assistance on the census survey. So somebody helped us with the people, the survey, to help us get the data set we needed or help us do surveying, but it's just people that are peripheral to the main work. We thank Dr. Alemu for valuable discussions and critical reading of the manuscript. So this was the head of a team in Kampala, in Uganda, and we did a workshop, and he was part of the team. He actually contracted with WHO for us to have a workshop in Uganda, and he was for his own people, all the people that have been working on emerging diseases in Africa, and there was a team, and it was very exciting because he would be involved in many of the projects that have been done, and he will discuss it in class. We thank Dr. Simpson for providing the TV isolates. So that's what I was saying. We thank people that gave us isolates, and we said what. And we thank Marge Simpson for her support. So people that are just being so supportive. Um, some people thank their dog and their wife and their family or God, but I don't think this is very scientific. We're just thanking people that directly helped us with um, with samples, data, analysis, thought. We also thank, the Secretary of Ministry of the Publication and the Census Survey again, the hospital. We thank Dr. Beatty for his kind gift of anti-dengue and S1 antibody. That it is actually a real person that works in our institution, and he shares his antibody he produced in mice. We thank Stephen Oppendorf for sharing results from a previous publication. So, or sometimes they give us unpublished data, and we say when it's compelling and important, and somebody else is doing a study that is similar, and they share some of their results because we're colleagues and we're comparing data, then you thank them for sharing results in previous publication. And but when you talked about these results, either in the results section or the discussion, you have to say, with permission from Dr. Steve Oppendorf, unpublished data, or you say unpublished data, and you have to, instead of a reference, you say unpublished data by who. And the financial support, funding. Financial support for this work was provided in part by the African Development Bank, the Fogarty International Center, and the National Center Institute of Health grant, and here's the number. This study was also supported in part by the World Health Organization and Centers for Disease Control, Prevention, postdoctoral fellowship awarded to B. Simpson. So if you have a scholarship, if you have a partial grant, if you have a supplementary funding, you thank them. You thank the organization that allow you to also carry out your research. You can thank, as we said, the people, the population, the hospital, the village, the subjects. And I think this is it for acknowledgement.
Marilena and Gregoria, we've had a question come in from, and please apologize if I do not pronounce names correctly, from Ajay, who says, when writing the abstract, do I have to report findings that are not significant, or should I just limit the findings I report in the abstract to those that are significant from my study?
Oh, if she or he are referring to significant as in statistical significance, no, you don't have to limit yourself, because sometimes, even though it's not statistically valid, you can show a trend, and you can say, even though this is not statistically valid, you say that in the full article, but in the abstract you said, we observed this trend, and you don't have to mention the statistics, and you can, of course, cite data that is not statistically proven, if or analyze, if that was the question.
Great, great. Thank you. And a question from Ashetu. One of the challenges of writing an abstract is fulfilling the maximum word limit of a journal by keeping to an introduction, the methods, the results, the conclusions, and the keywords. But with only 250 words, do you have any advice for how to do that effectively? Which bits do you compromise on in order to stick to your word limit?
As I said, you do very, very short introduction. Just introduce the topic. Very, very short approach to the problem. To answer this need, and then it's 2 sentences each. Like I was saying in the talk, you have the thought, and you've written the discussion, and you discuss your main main conclusion, that's the only one you put. In conclusion, we think this is important. So actually the three arguments, that main finding, that global message that you put in the first box, that should be the one that you discuss. You cannot discuss all the other side findings that actually supported your main topic. You can restrict yourself to that. It is an art. I was talking to Luisa this morning. It's an art. You write many versions until you're happy with it. You do it at the end and you seek help. People will help you, saying this is not important. So just think of, you're telling the story to somebody who doesn't have much time, the elevator talk, and you said, well, we did this and we did that and we did this and this is in. So only the most important, you're summarizing is the summary. Only the most important part is the ones you put in. You can have it a bit longer, like more than 500, more 600, and then highlight what you want to keep, and you'll start eliminating things that are either redundant or not essential. I don't know if Gregorio has more advice.
Yeah, one of the good things is majority of these abstracts are asking up to 250 words, which is very short. There are usually non-structured abstracts, which make things easier because you can simply write one paragraph. And as Marielena said, you can start with one sentence of introduction and going straight to the point of your results. You have to use a proper style to write that. It's like an art of really writing very concisely and objectively, but it becomes slightly easier when you don't have like to talk about introduction methods in a very methodical way. You can just be as one sentence. And there are quite a few examples out there that you could check different articles in which you can see examples on how you could do that. But it requires a lot of work because you really have to shorten everything and you cannot talk about everything the way you normally want it.
Yeah, and it's probably a really good idea to get someone to read it, isn't it? To have a proofreader or a couple of people who maybe one who's familiar with your work and one who isn't, just to see the readability of what you've offered.
Exactly.
This is actually one of the most important aspects because, as we mentioned before, the abstract is the most read part of your paper. People may not download your paper, but they are going to read your abstract to decide whether they want to read your paper or not. So it has to be really well written and it has to be very compelling to invite people to download your paper and actually read it. So yeah, if they don't read your whole study, definitely are going to read your title and your abstract. So you have to be you need to get feedback from a lot of people for sure.
So what? Yeah, it needs a lot of repetition of versions of the abstract until you get it right. But what Luisa was saying also, consult the journal or other people. If you, and Gori was also mentioning these examples of abstracts. When you choose the journals you want to approach for publishing, look at the abstracts and see the art and how people use, because this will be close to your topic. How do they condense everything in 250 words? And then it takes practice. So keep at it.
Yes, and I'll just read this one out from Rachidatu, who it's correlated with what we've been talking about, but they've asked, is there a standard percentage in the allocation of the number of words between the different sections of the abstract? But as we've just said, it's a judgment call and you need to work on it, get some different versions and some feedback from different people to really refine your different sections within the abstract. Great. So we've had a question come in from Sahiti. Sometimes journals will ask us to give either a structured or an unstructured abstract. If it's not mentioned, which one should we follow?
It will be the non-structured, because when there is a structure, they mention that they want a structured abstract. As Gregorio said, it's better not to be structured because it saves you a lot of words. If you have to have a subtitle that said material and methods, another subtitle that says results, is already taking words from you. So please, when you're going to publish, when you're going to send for publication, you're going to have the journal already selected, and you're going to see what style they use. There's also a guideline for authors in that journal that will explain how they want you to write your article. And regarding of the number of words in each section, I would say the most important is your results and your conclusion. You don't have to spend too much time in the introduction or methodology. You can just mention it. And then the meat of the abstract will be your main result and what was the significance of this? What is the impact? What is the conclusion you have? Yes,
Yeah, basically in the structure abstracts, you are revealing your methods by describing your results. While you're describing your results, you kind of say that's what we did, and it's kind of clear what kind of method you use, unless you have a methodist paper, which is going to be different.
Great. Yes. So I've just got a couple more questions about the actual abstract, and then we've just got a couple about the acknowledgements section. So in terms of the abstract, should we include recommendations as part of the conclusion within the abstract?
Yes, if you have room at the end, a sentence. After the discussion, it's important you have recommendations. It's not imperative, but yes, you can include them if you have the room.
And also, Michael just wondered if you could touch a little bit more on keywords in terms of, are there any keywords which should sort of regularly feature as part of an abstract?
Yes, indeed. Actually, the journal asks you for a list of keywords, and they will define what kind of keywords they will prefer. But you have to have your keywords on your topic, many of the different aspects of your topic. You decide the keywords relating to your work, and the article will also ask you others. So in the article it says it's in the journal. I'm sorry, the journal has guidelines and will ask you for keywords, and sometimes they will specify which. If not, you make sure you have different aspects. If it's autism, if it's childcare, psychology, sociology, whichever other topics you want this group to use to see, then you put them in there. TB, HIV, whatever.
Yeah, you should choose your keywords very carefully because that's what is going to make your article searchable. So whenever people type a keyword on Google and they type Zika virus microcephaly, they need to find your paper. So if you just put also too many broad terms, it may not be found. So you want to be found. So make sure you are also general, but also specific in terms of the keywords you choose.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So you could actually maybe look also at similar papers within your field and look at the sort of keywords they've used as well.
How you found them, how you found them. So now you want them to find you.
Exactly. Great. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions about acknowledgements. Abdul Wahab asks, sometimes we get funding, for example, from a local institution, which was also funded by an international agency. So do we include both within the acknowledgements? And if you do have a word limit, is there one that you should leave out or prioritize over the other?
Yes, you should acknowledge the institution, even though that institution is funded by, let's say, WHO or NIH. They have the funds and they decided to give them to you. So you should mention that institution instead of who is funding the institution. And that's if you have a word limit, that's the one that you should thank. All the direct grants and support you receive, that's the one that you use.
And closely related to that, Benedict has asked if your study's been funded by more than one agency, do you acknowledge them all? And is there an order for acknowledging them? So perhaps the size of the grant that you received from each, or is there no particular order that would reflect within?
I don't know of an order. You do acknowledge them all. A fellowship, a supplementary funding, a small grant. You acknowledge all the people all the grants you received. I I don't know if there is an order, you know, who gave you more money, who gave you less. I don't think so. You just thank, there's not a particular order that I know of. I don't know if Gregorio has more information on this.
No, to my knowledge as well, there is no such a thing like order for
Mm.
for funding. You usually have to list them all, that's for sure. It's a must, but not order necessarily. It doesn't mean anything which ones come first or not. But maybe you can decide based on the amount of funding you received. You can create your own, but I don't think there's whenever I look funding list, I never realize if the author thought of a specific order for some reason. I don't think that's not to my knowledge.
Okay, great. Well, I think I'm mindful of time, but if I just ask one more question that came in from Solange, who asks that in health service management studies, it is good practice to map the work processes before effectively collecting your data. So should this information, the information about the work process, which is a qualitative method, is that relevant to include in the abstract?
Yes, you have to mention it. You cannot present the whole approach and how you went all about it. If you can summarize it in one sentence, that would be important. Yes, it needs to be mentioned how you did the study, but it has to be brief. You cannot dwell on the strategy you use too much.
No. So if it's a significant part of your methodology, then it should be included. You need to mention it. You need to find a way to include that in your method
Yes,
section.
like Gregory was saying, we analyze this many samples by using this, or by using this methodology, we analyze this. So when you're talking about your results, your main results, you mention the methodology you used to obtain those results. Only the important ones were the important results. It's to your judgment, each person, which is the most important technology that you want people to know. And also as a keywords, you know, that technology is going to be looked by others. So you might want to mention it.